the radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Wednesday. It's Wednesday. I don't look at the computer. On all days the same when you're under lockdown. Yeah, thank you for joining me. This is great. Today we're going to talk about the lockdowns. We're going to talk about lockdowns. We're going to talk about the fact that they are slowly, much too slow, slowly going away. Much too slow, much too late, in my view. But they are indeed dissipating. The government is allowing us to live. Thank you, government. Yes, a number of states are slowly opening up the economies, allowing people to go to work, allowing businesses to open, allowing construction to start, even allowing in some places restaurants to open under certain conditions. So we are slowly opening up the economy. The same thing is happening in Europe, and even in Italy. People now are allowed to go out into the street and jog. Businesses, even there, are slowly opening up. People are allowed to meet one another, although many bans and restrictions and so on are still in place all over Europe. So it's slowly happening. And that's good. Of course, the price we have paid in shutting millions of people down, tens of millions of people down for months now, a couple of months. That price, we will never get that time back. We will never get those earnings back. Businesses will never get back the opportunities that they have lost, the income that they have lost. And of course, we will pay for years and years and years, decades, the economic price of the shutdown, the economic price of the response to the shutdown, the stimulus package, the Federal Reserve, all the things the government have done since then. And of course, we will pay for decades the political cost of letting them getting away with this, letting them get away with it. The fact that they got away with it. They got away with shutting this country down, and very few people said anything. I want to talk a little bit about people who have said something. And one of the inspiring things that I've noticed over the last week are the people who are standing up for the government. And people have asked me in the past, what can one do? Well, we've got some fantastic examples of what one can do. Beyond speaking, beyond writing, beyond yelling, beyond doing podcasts, one can actually act out there in ways that constitute civil disobedience, that constitute protest, but do so in a way that respects the idea of the rule of law, that respects the actual danger that exists out there in terms of the virus, that actually respect science. I think the best example of this, at least the best example I know of this, is what Linda and Quinn Codet have done with a gallery in Napa Valley. They have a gallery in Napa Valley. I've visited the gallery in Napa Valley once or twice. I can't remember now. I visited an older gallery that they had in somewhere in the Bay Area. But they have been closed since, I think, mid-March, when California shut down. Now, I know Linda and Quinn, and they have devoted all their time, all their effort, all their energy, I assume all their money, to this gallery. And it's tough to make a living owning a retail store, particularly an art gallery with art that is not necessarily considered the sexiest, the most prominent in the world in which we live. And it's they've devoted their lives to this. I've known them many years. And this is their passion, this is their life, this is what they put their energy into. And they've been shut down. They can't go and make a living. They've got employees. They can't hire the employees. What are they going to pay them from? Out of savings? And what they did last week was send a letter, and you know, I might get some of the details here wrong, but generally this is the case. Send a letter to the press and to the government and to the various, I guess, authorities saying, look, we're opening on Monday. We're going to open responsibly. We're going to only allow X number of people in the gallery. We're going to insist that they wear masks. We're going to practice social distancing. We're going to not let people touch the arts and therefore maybe contaminate their hands if there's coronavirus there. We're going to clean the gallery every night. We're going to take care of it. We're going to make the safest environment possible. And at the same time, we're going to open. It is our right, under the laws of this country, under the Constitution of this country, to open, to pursue our life, to pursue our livelihood, to engage in our property. And if you want to arrest us, arrest us. If you arrest us, we will challenge you in court. And we are willing to go to the Supreme Court if that is what is necessary. But we are not just in protest. They're not doing this for the sake of the protest. They're doing this for the sake of their livelihood. But if this means that it becomes a protest, then so be it. We will protest it using the law of the land, using the Constitution, all the way to the Supreme Court. Now that is a beautiful way to take a stand. It is a way to take a stand consistent with the principles of this country. It is a way to take a stand while recognizing and explicitly identifying that there is a rule of law, that there is a constitution that people should abide by. It is a way to say, what you are doing here is unconstitutional. What we're doing here goes against the spirit and the word of the principles underlying this country. So, I think, if that is the way to do it, rather than rushing into state houses armed with guns. I mean, if you're going into state house with guns, then be prepared to use them. And if you're going to be prepared to use them, generally, don't carry a gun unless you're prepared to use them. But if you're openly carrying a gun in a protest at a state capitol, then you're basically declaring revolution. And then you better be prepared for that revolution. You better be prepared for what that entails. But imagine, as a mass civil disobedience, if hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of small businesses in a particular state wrote a similar letter to the police, to the state legislature, and just on Monday morning opened their stores. What are they going to do? They're going to run around shutting you all down? They're going to run around arresting all of you? There is massive power in numbers. And if it's a just cause, then it's not something to hide. It's something to be proud of. It's something to announce, something to declare, something to stand up for your liberty. So if you want to engage in a kind of a civil disobedience, declaring your rights, standing up to authority, then that's the way to do it. Not hide, not open your store in hiding, although of course I think you have a right to do that too. But declare it publicly, send letters to the media. But imagine if we got a movement to do that in the hundreds or in the thousands. Again, they're not going to arrest thousands. That's the power. So let me again thank Linda and Quint for their courage, for their principled stand, their reasoned stand. They explain what they do. They're not rushing in. They're not flouting the law for the sake of flouting the law. They're not denying that the coronavirus is a problem. They're not wearing masks and rubbing shoulder to shoulder against one another. They're not carrying semi-automatic weapons. They are saying this still is a land of law. You, the government, are violating the principle of that law. We are challenging you to that. And we are taking action. We're not just writing a letter to the editor. We're taking action. So for those of you who want to act, for those of you who keep saying, oh, you know, what should I do, Yaron? What do we do to stand up? Well, here's what you do. Linda and Quint have given us an example. A respectful, strong, powerful, reasoned, thoughtful. And I think an example will have an impact. And already you're seeing other news stories. But other gallery owners opening up stores. I don't know if they were inspired by Linda and Quint or not. But other gallery owners saying, wait a minute. Why aren't we an essential service? Why are they allowed to open and we're not? Restaurants in California opening, saying, we're open. You want to come? Basically arrest us. Now, I wish they'd say that explicitly. I wish they would engage in behaviors that respected the social distancing. But it's great to see people standing up and acting in their own self-interest, acting on their own values, acting to pursue their own life and their own livelihood. And life is livelihood. Livelihood is life. One cannot separate the two. You know, a tragic case of this is a woman in Texas who opened up her salon and was arrested. And she just got 7 days in jail for that. Horrible. Just unjust. Here's a woman, I mean, she said she's trying to feed her kids. I mean, unfortunately, she used it as kind of, I'm not being selfish, I've got kids to feed. She should have said, I'm being selfish, I've got kids to feed. They're my kids. And it's my livelihood, and it's my store, and it's my life, and these are my values. And here's what I did to protect my customers and myself. And my customers didn't have to come to me. They could have stayed outside. They could have stayed home. But we voluntarily chose to take a risk. Who are you to stop us? This is in Texas. The judge sentenced her to 7 days in jail. Now, it turns out that I think the Attorney General of Texas is denouncing the judge and asking her to reverse the sentence. We'll see if that happens. I certainly hope it does. But again, more people like that. They can't arrest you all. They can't arrest all of us. And I think far more effective than demonstrating in the street, which I don't think you have a right to demonstrate, particularly if you're blocking traffic and interfering with people's lives. But much more effective than occupying state houses, than marching on whatever, is open your business. Go to work. Take a drive when they tell you not to. And challenge them. Challenge them to enforce the law when a significant number of people think it is wrong and unconstitutional. Challenge them to take it to court. Challenge them to take the principle all the way up to the Supreme Court. Let the highest court in the land determine whether what they have all done is constitutional. I've seen many constitutional scholars say, yes, it is, based on precedent. But it would be great to hear the arguments. It would be great to force their hand. And it would be good to hear the Supreme Court actually, or whatever, the whatever court it is, actually say, yes, these lockdowns are constitutional. And then we'd know how much to respect those courts. Because I don't think it's constitutional. Not. You have an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It cannot be that lockdown is consistent with that. Yeah, Enric mentions, I Am Spartacus. There's a great scene in Spartacus, the movie, with Kirk Douglas, one of my favorite movies, where at the end of the movie, the Romans have captured Spartacus and all his men, but they don't know what Spartacus looks like. No internet in those days. No photos, no IDs. They didn't know what Spartacus looks like. So they asked the men, if you identify yourself as Spartacus, you will be killed, but your men will be spared. So Spartacus is about to stand up and declare himself, I am Spartacus. And one of the other slaves, former slaves, freed slave, free men, stands up and says, I am Spartacus. And then somebody else stands up and says, no, I am Spartacus. Somebody else stands up, I'm Spartacus. And soon, hundreds, thousands of people are standing there declaring themselves to be Spartacus. Now, in the movie, you're dealing with Romans and the Roman Empire and the brutality of the Roman Empire. So it doesn't end well. So I'm not suggesting that in this case, that I am Spartacus ends the way it does in the movie, because it doesn't. Luckily, we live in America still. In the movie, they're all crucified. Everybody who declared himself Spartacus. But the Romans never know who it is. They never discover the real Spartacus. And that is a victory over the Romans for which they are willing to die. Of course, the alternative, even though Spartacus is going to be put to death, what is going to happen to them? They're going to become slaves again. So their lives are forfeited anyway. They fought for freedom. They were not going to give up and just become slaves again. Great scene in the movies. I encourage you to watch it. So talking about Supreme Courts, there is a case in Wisconsin where this lockdown has been challenged. And it has gone all the way to the Supreme Court of Wisconsin. At least that's my understanding that this video is, right? It's the Wisconsin legislature versus Andrea Palm. And I haven't had a chance to read the case, but there is this video of the judge making a statement before, I guess, the arguments are being heard. And it's a great statement, so I thought I'd play it for you because this is the sentiment. I'd like this to go to the courts so that some judges might be expressing themselves this way, so these ideas will get out there, even if it turns out that they win in court. So this is Judge Colin T. Roth, I think, at the Supreme Court of the state of Wisconsin. And these are her, it's a short video, 1 minute. These are her opening statements.
Counsel, as you begin your argument, I'd like to direct your attention to Article 1, Section 1 of the Wisconsin Constitution, which reads in part that all people have certain inherent rights. Among these are liberty. To secure these rights, governments are instituted, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. My question for you is, where in the Constitution did the people of Wisconsin confer authority on a single unelected cabinet secretary to compel almost 6 million people to stay at home and close their businesses and face imprisonment if they don't comply, with no input from the legislature, without the consent of the people? Isn't it the very definition of tyranny for one person to order people to be imprisoned for going to work, among other ordinarily lawful activities? Where does the Constitution say that's permissible, counsel? Counsel, as you begin.
Good for Justin, for the justice. Yes, it says Wisconsin Supreme Court. So it is the Wisconsin Supreme Court. You got the case number. You can look it up and get more evidence. But that was excellent. That was exactly right. And it is the case in many states, in many of these states, that there's been one person as part of the executive who has unilaterally declared. By the way, thanks to Steve Thompson, a good friend of mine, for sending me this video. But one person in the executive branch makes a declaration, whether it's Andrew Cuomo. I talked about this with Onkar Gate a while ago. I think it was Onkar. I've also talked about this in my talk about objectivity in government. If you're going to declare such a radical thing, like lockdowns, then the legislature should vote on it and declare a state of emergency. It should pass a bill that defines what the emergency constitutes, when the emergency is over, what powers it is giving the executive branch to enforce this emergency, what within the scope of the emergency the executive branch is allowed to do. It should be a very thoughtful, very clear, very objective declaration. Law, bill. And it has to be super delimited. And I think it would only happen in unbelievably extreme cases, more extreme than what we're witnessing today. And it couldn't be on all counties and all towns and all cities. It would have to be very thoughtful in terms of how it was implemented. And then I think, such a law would have to immediately go to the Supreme Court of the state. And they would have to review, a non-political entity would have to review this law and rule whether it was constitutional and when it was appropriate for the risks and the danger involved. They would have scientists testify, they would have political theorists testify, and they would have to make a decision about whether this was appropriate law, constitutional law. And only then could one even imagine having a lockdown take effect. And by the way, all this can happen very quickly. All this could happen very quickly. Now, I've said before, and I'll say again, none of that happened. The lockdowns were not necessary in most of the country. Maybe in New York for a short period of time. And my guess is that even in New York, if the government had taken the right actions early enough and done it properly, the testing, tracking, isolating, then the lockdowns would have probably not been necessary. And given, it might be the fact that given the control the government has over the hospital system, and therefore the potential overloading of that hospital system, that a lockdown in somewhere like New York was necessary for a short period of time. As soon as that burden on the hospitals was over, it should have been immediately lifted. Not lifted and saying to people, go do whatever the hell you want. No. Saying to people, look, guys, you got to behave. This is a dangerous virus. There are people who are very susceptible and probably likely to die from it. Here's how we recommend you behave. You, wear a mask, you socially distance. If you're vulnerable to this disease, by the way, stay at home. If you're over 70 years old, stay at home. If you live with somebody over 70 years old, stay at home. With real recommendations. I'll read you a letter from Sweden in a minute that has these kind of lists. Jennifer asked, the lockdown was supposed to flatten the curve. Assuming that has happened, what is the rationale to continue lockdown? Absolutely. The lockdown was not supposed to save lives from the virus. The lockdown was supposed to save lives from overload in the hospital. It was supposed to flatten the curve so that the hospitals wouldn't be overrun and people would die because they couldn't get treatment, like happened for a while in Italy. But the curve is being flattened. The curve was flattened in New York, certainly. And the hospital survived there. It was hell, but they survived. We're over the hell. The curve was flattened. It's time to open up again. Now, again, open up cautiously. Open up with these kind of suggestions, but open up. And remember, New York is New York. New York is unique in the population density, in the demographics of the population, in the heavy use of public transportation. There's no evidence that any other part of the country is as badly hit as New York. Certainly, there are hundreds of counties in this country that have barely been hit at all. And there are places in this country that have plenty of hospital capacity. There's no reason to have flattened the curve to begin with. And there certainly isn't reason to continue this. But no, the lockdowns, in my view, were never necessary, again, except with extreme circumstances and only because we live in a mixed economy and the government has screwed up the hospital system so badly. And that's certainly not necessary now. Now, somebody said, isn't testing, tracking, isolating a never-ending battle until we have a vaccine? Yes, it is. You have to keep doing it. It costs a lot of money. You have to keep on top of it. But indeed, they're not doing it. And there's no indication they're going to do it. There's no indication that they've built the infrastructure to test, track, and isolate. And look, here's the point. Here's an important point. People are saying, if you open up, people are going to die. Yes. Yes, people are going to die. People were always going to die. Again, the point of lockdowns was not to reduce deaths from the virus. The point of the lockdown was to reduce overload on hospitals. Instead of people dying all at once, the idea was that people die over time. People are going to die from this virus. People die. That's life. Death is part of that. And one has to take that into account, that people are going to die. One has to make sure the hospitals can cope with people getting sick and being hospitalized and continue investing in those hospitals to make sure that they can deal with whatever's going to happen and accept the fact that people are going to die. And if you don't want them to die, then the policy is for those who are susceptible to isolate them. And again, I'll get to this letter in a second. Somebody says here, many people think it's crazy to not just trust the experts. It doesn't help that some of the loudest skeptics are kooky. How should a rational person think about trusting experts in our mixed culture? I think you should trust experts. I trust the experts. I think what most epidemiologists are saying is true. But epidemiologists shouldn't run the country. Their only concern is minimizing deaths. Well, yeah. If you want to minimize deaths, if the standard is minimize long-term deaths from corona, then you should stick everybody at home and not let them out. On the other hand, think about police, right? If you made police in charge of policy, and their only goal was to minimize rape, I've used this example before, to minimize rape, then they'd say, easy, keep men at home. After 7 o'clock, have a curfew on men. Yeah, rape would go down. So, it's absolutely the case that we should listen to experts and take everything they say into account and judge, because experts don't all agree. Try to evaluate which experts seem more rational and reasonable than others. But listen to the experts on what the experts know. Fauci is not an expert on policy. He's not an expert on rights. He's not an expert on economics. He's not an expert on the role of government. He's an expert in epidemiology. Great. I think what he says is probably true. He said, 80 to 120,000 people were going to die, and then they lowered it to 60,000 because there was a lot of pressure, I guess, from the Trump administration. But no, it looks like in the short run, 80 to 120,000 people are going to die from coronavirus. And in the long run, that number is going to be quite a bit higher than that. It's just the reality of a virus like this. It's deadly. It's bad. And if you're susceptible, if you've got a weak immune system, if you've got chest problems, lung problems, then you've got to take care of yourself. Be fit, be healthy, right? Protect your immune system by doing that. But also, wash your hands a lot and don't go to crowded places and make sure you wear a mask and do all the things that the experts are telling us will actually help keep us alive. Now, somebody said that, Como today said that those admitted to hospital, many of them were in isolation. Well, they couldn't have been in isolation, right? Not total. They could have gotten the coronavirus from the groceries. They could have got the coronavirus from the handyman who came, or the delivery guy who brought it. They could have maybe snuck out once in a while. But it's, it is still true that if you stay at home, if you protect yourself, if you do the common sense things or the things that experts recommend to protect yourself, then you are going to be much better off. Much better off. Thoughts on law enforcement in response to COVID-19? I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure what the question is, I guess. I'm not sure what the question is, Delta. But I think that law enforcement should leave people alone, generally. Unless you're behaving in ways that clearly put your neighbor at risk. You're being irresponsible. You're being really, really placing people at risk. Then they should leave you alone. They should leave you alone. And one of the problems with laws like this that are non-objective lockdown laws is they place law enforcement in very difficult situations of how to deal with it and what to do. It's very corrupting to be a law enforcement officer and have to commit to laws that are what do you call it? Non-objective, victimless crimes. Okay, let me take a few more of these questions. And I do want to read you this letter from Sweden. Why do liberals tend to believe in stay at home while conservatives are vocal about opening the economy? I think that liberals generally, the left generally, is much more altruistic or collective. Well, both altruistic. It just manifests itself differently. The left believes that the economic dangers that occur here can all be taken care of by government. I haven't missed questions. I will get to them. I'm just doing them in different order. So I apologize, but I haven't missed any questions. So the left believes that, a stimulus package can cure all. The government handing you a check can cure all. I think they're right, particularly people in their homes don't believe that. They still believe that the solution, that when you shut down an economy, there are real economic consequences. But it's also the case that the left is far more interested in certain forms of altruism, and the right is interested in other forms of altruism. So the left here is much more interested in egalitarianism and treating everybody the same. In treating everybody the same in the sense of, if you have to lock down grandma, then we're going to have to lock down grandson. That's kind of egalitarianism. That's equality, which the left is much more strong advocate for. But this is the problem I have with conservatives on this issue. Conservatives are also, on this issue, much more likely to be kooks. That's a technical term. They're much more likely to be believers in conspiracy theories. I see these signs at these demonstrations saying, coronavirus is fake news, right? It's a conspiracy. It doesn't really exist. It's the flu or less than the flu. And I think by doing that, they discredit the whole idea of opening up the economy. So unfortunately, it's like you get irrationality from all directions. Again, I gave the example of Linda and Quint Codet, and they were opening the gallery as an example of how to do this properly. Recognize the danger, recognize this is serious, recognize the idea of the rule of law, and then challenge it by taking action. And that's perfect. Conservatives, too many conservatives who have argued for this, are arguing in a kooky way. And overall, I don't know that it is a liberal conservative issue. So take Sweden, the country that we are all now jealous of. where they haven't gone all locked down on people and they've relied on voluntary cooperation. Well, Sweden is a leftist country. It's even an egalitarian country. Now, it's not leftist, i.e. socialist, but certainly leftist as a welfare state. And on many of the kind of social issues, they're quite left. Oh my God, they're even open borders left. Right? So here's Sweden doing what supposedly conservatives in America want. And then there's a conservative government in the UK, which everybody admires, right? Boris Johnson, and he shut down the UK completely. Now, it is true that they are conservatives, but they are in the tiniest of minorities. I'd say some old-style conservatives, non-Trumpian conservatives, who actually believe in individual liberty, who actually believe in individual freedom, who actually believe in the limited role of government. There are a few of them, not many. And they are the better voices against the lockdown. But again, most of the conservative voices against the lockdown are not credible, are not good voices, are not voices that actually help in this case. Partially, and part of the problems with conservatives, is that they reject the experts. They reject the science. And a proper opposition to the lockdown respects the science, respects the, respects the experts, and then says, yeah, and in spite of that, in spite of everything you're saying about this disease, which is all true, it's wrong to lock people up. This country is a country based on voluntary cooperation. Unless you can show that I'm a risk to my fellow man, you have no right to lock me up. And it has to be a specific risk. So again, I would like to see the protests that these conservatives have. Do they socially distance? Are they wearing masks? Are they respecting the circumstances? And I've said from the beginning, demonstrate 6 feet apart, like they did in Israel a few weeks ago. And again, I don't think demonstrations are the right way to go. I don't think marches and demonstrations, are right. Not if they're blocking people's traffic and livelihood. Now, right now, there's no traffic, and I guess there are no stores, so they're not interfering with anybody, so maybe it's okay. And if you're going to do it, make sure you do it at the State House. Make sure you do it at a government building, not out in a commercial area. So I think to the extent that there are still people who respect individual rights, or at least do that, don't advocate for conspiracy theories, and don't denigrate the experts and denigrate what do you call it? Don't take the disease seriously. Then if they're truly for individual rights, they're for freedom and limited government, then great. But that's not the case necessarily in Sweden, and yet they have the right policy. So that's good. Protest at the Hall of Justice, that's great. If you maintain distance, that's great. If it's done in a respectful way, that is perfect. I think more effective would be if all those people who own small businesses went and opened them up. I think that would be even more effective than a demonstration. But yeah, and if they're not carrying cards that say this is a hoax, if they're not carrying cards that this is fake news, if they're not belittling the crisis, then it's great that there's still some people doing this. And some of them might even be Trump supporters. I grant you even that. All right. There is this question of other ways in which death actually increased because of the lockdowns. Now, it's a mixed case because two sources of death actually have come down dramatically because of the lockdowns. Again, so you could argue lockdowns are good. Why? Because traffic accidents are way down. And crime is way down. Crime in the streets. We'll talk about crime in the home in a minute. So violent death is down dramatically in places like New York, Chicago, elsewhere. And traffic accidents are down. And traffic accidents kill a lot of people. So maybe next time we should have a lockdown to stop traffic accidents. But as I said, if you lock all the males up after 7 p.m., there'll be less rape, less violence, less murder. Oh, is San Jose, crime is up. Yeah, that's unusual. In most of the rest of the country, crime is down. San Jose is the stabbing capital of the nation. Wow, I didn't know that. Huh. Weird. All right. Now I'm scared to go to San Jose. I don't know. I used to live in San Jose. I kind of feel bad about that. But there are other ways, clearly, where crime has increased. Spousal abuse, child abuse has gone through the roof. I've seen statistics, right? All those kind of abuses. Suicide has gone up significantly. So depression, mental health generally has deteriorated as a consequence of these lockdowns. So there's clearly a health effect, a negative health effect to the lockdowns that is not being appreciated. There are people talking about that, and good for them. But it's unfortunate that not more people are taking note of the real dangers of locking people up. And it's really, I'm sure there are some unbelievable tragedies in terms of child abuse that are happening because parents at home, they're worried about, income. They probably can't stand each other, but now they're stuck with each other all day long. They're shouting, they're yelling, they're arguing. The kid gets out of hand, and wham. It's horrible, but it's a reality. Does the idea of locking down come from altruism? We all must make a shared sacrifice. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It very much comes from this idea of shared sacrifice. But it also, it's not just altruism. Altruism dominates in the form of egalitarianism here. That we can't just ask old people to be locked up. We all have to share in the sacrifice. We can't just ask obese people to be careful. We all have to be careful. Right. So, yes, there's definitely an element, but it's not just altruism. It's also this philosopher king attitude, this idea that these experts don't just provide expertise that is knowledge and information. They can dictate our lives for us. That they are knowledgeable. This is one difference between the left and the right. The left wants to be ruled by experts and wants experts to rule. They want experts to dictate. They want philosopher kings. They want them to dictate our lives. It's scientific. They want central planners because central planning is scientific. It's expertise. The right, and I'm caricaturing, but I just caricatured the left, so I might as well caricature the right, but I think this is true, doesn't trust experts, doesn't believe in experts. They're elites. They're elitists. We shouldn't have them. Plus, all human beings are flawed. We're all sinners. You can't have central planning because the central planner is a sinner. He's flawed. He's irrational. So the right is advocating for getting rid of the experts, getting rid of science, getting rid of knowledge, and going by guts. Trump has expressed his gut feelings about this crisis over and over again during this crisis. And we don't want scientific central planners. We want nationalistic central planners. We want people who protect the fatherland, the homeland. Not that can micromanage everything, but could, in a big picture, make sure that all the jobs stay in America. So it's an emotionalist attitude. So the right wants to be governed by emotion. The left wants to be ruled by science, but ruled. Not governed, ruled. And that's the difference between the two, one of the differences between the two. So I think it's a combination of those things, but altruism has a huge, and I've said this from the beginning of this coronavirus, that altruism has a big factor to play here. All right, let me read you a part of this letter from Sweden. This appeared in the AIER website, a website I highly recommend. They've got a lot of good articles. It's the American Institute for Economic Research. It's run by libertarians. It's libertarian economists. But a lot of the stuff is very good, particularly on the coronavirus. Well, some of it's been very good. Some of it's been so-so, but some of it's been very good. Anyway, Dan Klein, who's a professor of economics at George Mason University, actually taught at Santa Clara University when I was there. Right? And Dan Klein wrote an article about Sweden, and this is some Swedish guy writing to Dan, and they published this, about his experience in Sweden and his critique of the way America is handling all of this. And I'm reading you excerpts, but you can read the whole thing somewhere else. He says, I will just point out that the American people have been buffaloed into a very binary way of thinking. There are only two possibilities when dealing with COVID-19: complete lockdown or nothing at all. This is also referred to as TINA. There is no alternative. By the way, I see this all over the place, this idea of only two alternatives. It permeates people's thinking everywhere. It's as if people can't think beyond the number two. So, for example, you can either sacrifice yourself to other people or other people to yourself. You can either be an altruist or you can be an exploitative man. There's nothing else. There's no third alternative. Rand's morality, Rand's ethics is a third alternative. You can either be a Republican, and therefore everything the Republicans do is great, or a Democrat, and therefore everything the Democrats do is great, and everything the other side does is horrible. There's no nuance. There's no alternative. There's only two options. You can either isolate at home or you can go orgy in the streets. Nothing else. No alternatives. And I see that all over the place. All over the place. People can only think in twos. And actually, this particular only two possibilities, again, came up in a discussion I had on this show with Anka Gate. And we pointed out that all the states have positioned it as, well, what choice do we have? All we have is lockdown, or everybody just behave as they always have behaved. But no, there are other alternatives. There are other ways of living. There are other things that can be done. So the letter from Sweden goes on. For many of my American friends, they find it difficult to understand that there are many possibilities in between the two extremes. In fact, a more nuanced approach not only makes more sense, but is more sustainable. That is precisely what the Swedish approach is all about. Hallelujah. I mean, that is absolutely right. And generally, what we lack in our entire political debate is any kind of nuance. Nuance is completely dead. Like facts, evidence, context. No. One or the other. You got only two options. He continues, if you look at the numbers, you will see that there is a negligible risk to those aged 4 to 50 years old. I think it's actually 0 to 50 years old. This group also happens to represent the most economically productive group in society, as well as the group that spends the most money. So why shut them down? Wow, it's as if he listens to my show. Because isn't that exactly what I've been saying? That this is the group that's productive, this is the group that works, this is the group that creates economic activity. If you shut down people over 50, or certainly over 70, you're going to do very little economic damage. So why are you shutting down? Why do you need to shut down them when they're not at risk of getting hurt? I mean, very low risk of getting hurt. I mean, it's just stunning. It's so obvious. I've been saying this from day one. And by the way, day one was February 1. February 1 was the first show I did on coronavirus. I did it with Amesh Adalja. And I've done 20, this is number 27. 27 shows on this. So there are people out there saying, oh, No response. Yaron is not talking about this issue. Really? And I've been consistent from the beginning. I mean, maybe some nuance here and there, but basically consistent from the beginning. This is from the Swedish guy again. Well, it's an American living in Sweden. The response I get from friends is that they must be shut down because otherwise people will die. This is an emotion-based argument. Wow, this guy's like... The reality is, he says, is that in Sweden, all at-risk people have been asked to self-quarantine. If you do that, how will their lives be threatened by allowing the under 50 crowd to go out with some social distancing guidelines? Again, exactly what I've been saying. If people isolate themselves over 70, over 60, and they truly isolate themselves and take responsibility for that, how are they going to get the virus from young people? Now, they might still get the virus if they don't wash their hands enough, and if they have stuff coming into the house that they don't take care of, but it reduces their risk dramatically. He goes on, keep in mind that if you live with an at-risk person or are a primary caregiver for an at-risk person, then in Sweden, you're expected to self-quarantine. Again, expected, not demanded. Or at least go to extreme social distancing. Again, makes sense. What I've been saying all along. Lock grandmother in the room and don't let her out. And take care of her. Right? Or you stay home because you're taking care of your grandmother. I myself, he says, had some concerns about whether I was in the risk group. And I took the precaution of keeping my kids home from school until such time as I could get a more definitive answer from my doctor. My kids' school fully supported me in this approach. Well, of course they would. Why wouldn't they? So I go back to my American friends and ask, how can allowing the under 50 crowd out with social distancing put at-risk population in danger? Yes, it requires people to take personal responsibility and to actively work to protect those at risk. And assuming this is followed, then those at risk can be expected to be reasonably protected. Reasonably protected, note, not fully protected. You cannot eliminate risk from life. Let's see. He says then, yes, over the next 18 months, at-risk people will get the virus and there will be many that die. This is in large part unavoidable. Absolutely. And he ends, Americans have been buffaloed into TINA. There is no alternative. The reality is that there are a wide range of responses, and one size does not fit all. There are sophisticated approaches that can be deployed which do not necessitate the destruction of our economy and the financial decimation of people and their families. What New York City does should not necessarily be followed in Iowa. Iowa might look more like Sweden, and New York City more like Helsinki. Absolutely. So, I mean, here is a voice, an American voice from Sweden. Maybe he listens to this show. Who knows? Probably not. It's just common sense. Well, maybe more than common sense, but it makes sense. Right. All right. Okay, Jax wants to clarify that San Jose isn't the actual stabbing capital of the U.S. It's an internal joke when talking about gun violence, since many of our criminals prefer stabbing to shooting. You're safe, Yaron. Thanks. I'm glad I could visit. I still have a business in San Jose. I can't afford not to go there. All right. So, look, I don't want to say much more on this because I've been saying it for 2 months, 3 months, and 27 shows or whatever. I'll create a playlist of just all my COVID-19 episodes. So if anybody wants them, they can see it. Somebody is asking what my views are on Justin Amash running for president. I think I've already answered this question. I think I've given my views, but I don't mind sharing them again. I mean, as I've said, I like Justin Amash. I like his courage in standing up to Republicans. I especially like his courage standing up to Trump. I like the fact that he voted to impeach Trump. I like a lot of what he said about the economy. I like the fact that he's voted against many of the spending and regulatory bills that were so popular with his fellow Republicans. I like the fact that sometimes he's the only Republican voting against something. He's an independent thinker or an independent legislature. I think he's been more articulate and less flaky and weird and conspiracy theory inclined than Ron Paul ever was. I think he's a better congressman than Ron Paul ever was. I don't like his foreign policy. I think he's bought into the libertarian pacifist wing of foreign policy, and that saddens me. But I would put that aside, given the options that we have today, and support him. Unfortunately, he's running with the Libertarian Party. And I know all this gets messy. If he was running as an independent, he would get my unmitigated support. Really. I would embrace him. I would send him money. I would, speak on the campaign trail for him. I don't know. But I would support him. And I would mention that I disagree with the foreign policy, but in this crisis that this country faces today, a voice like Justin Amash on domestic policy is needed and is necessary. But the Libertarian Party is so, is the right word. It's so despicable. It's so dominated by the worst elements among libertarians, the anarchists, the really, it's a whole stupid wing of the, the subjectivist, do whatever the hell you want. I should be able to. It's just not a political party I can support. So it's going to be very difficult for me. And I understand why he's running as a libertarian, partially because they're registered in 50 states. And so let's see how the campaign plays out. Let's see if he sticks to his guns. And let's see how the Libertarian Party behaves. I'm not quite ready to endorse Justin Amash for president. I'm not quite ready to vote for him. But I do like him. I do, in that sense, I do like him. And I just don't like the party. I just don't like the party. I wish, maybe if the Capitalist Party was organized and ready and set, he could, but they're not registered in 50 states, so you can't run. And he would probably oppose the foreign policy principles of the Capitalist Party, I think. But on other issues, he would be supportive. So that's a tough one. And of course, I hope he gets a lot of votes. I can't vote, so I won't be voting for him because I just can't vote. But I hope he gets a lot of votes because I think there has to be a voice out there that represents the alternative to Trump versus Biden. And certainly on the seemingly on the non-left side, call it that way, there needs to be an alternative to Trump. And I did almost prefer anybody to Trump. And I know I've got Trump derangement syndrome. I'm deranged by Trump. I really am. I think he's horrible, horrific. He's deranging. So somebody opposed to the left who is not Trump would be fantastic. All right, is Tina a result of lack of confidence in one's ability to think? Yes, I think that's part of it. It's lack of confidence in other people. So one of the things you get in Sweden is a high level of confidence in your neighbor. I think Americans don't trust each other anymore. I think part of this partisanship, part of this tribalism is this mentality of, oh, yeah, I would do the social distancing, but that kook over there who doesn't believe in science won't. And the kook over there thinks that you're a nutty socialist, and therefore you're going to have parties all day. Anyway, there's a low level of trust among Americans, which is really hurting us, I think, on a lot of different aspects, and that's one of it. It's a distrust of your own ability to think and your own willingness and belief in your ability to take on personal responsibility for yourself. And then it's altruism, which is driven, in spite of the fact that it's dominant on the left and on the right, it's driven by Christianity, which says you can't trust people. It's original sin, right? Can't trust people. People are too, quote, selfish in the popular sense. They'll do stuff irresponsibly. They won't be responsible. So we have to force them to be responsible. And the altruism, which says we have to be in this together, we have to all suffer together, we have to suffer. And we deserve this. This is our sin against God, or our sin against the planet, or our sin against, nationalism. It's all because of trade. It's all because we opened up to China. It's all because of all those Chinese flying into the country. That's what brought us this coronavirus. And therefore, capitalism is inherently sinful. And therefore, we are suffering the sins of capitalism now. It's all original sin in some kind of variation. Right? So yes. So it's our inability to think plus our inability to trust ourselves and others. Is Amish a dulger and objectivist? Yeah, I think he calls himself an objectivist, and I think he is an objectivist. He's spoken at objectivist conferences. Have you heard of Lewai and Serpetza? No, I haven't. They are pro-free market, pro-Ayn Rand YouTubers living in China, criticizing the CCP and earning their ire. Oh wow, are they Chinese? I'm curious if they're Chinese. I'll look them up. I'll look them up and see if I can find them. Are they Americans in China or Chinese in China? And but I won't say friends because I think that's presumptuous of me. But many acquaintances or several acquaintances in China who are pro-free markets and love Ayn Rand, and who some of them sat in jail as dissidents and have opposed the CCP and had a think tank. And there was actually an Ayn Rand society at one point at one of the local universities. And there's objectivist groups in China, and there's objectivist lectures in China. And there's a guy who travels around China giving lectures on objectivism in Chinese. And there are lots of people in China who are big Ayn Rand fans, and some even consider themselves objectivists, and others who are just free market economists and love free markets. So it doesn't surprise me that we've got these YouTubers. Just looking at it casually, it looks like they're Americans. I would have preferred they would be Chinese, but having a couple of Americans in China criticizing the Chinese and criticizing the authorities, great. I hope they stay safe, because it can't be very safe, as my friends in China who have sat in jail know. It can't be that safe to criticize the Chinese government. Libertarians don't really hate the initiation of force. What they really hate is order and objectivity. Absolutely. What they hate is objectivity. What they hate is moral absolutism. What they hate is being told that their drugs, while might be legal, should be immoral. That they're philandering, that they're sleeping around, that their subjectivism is immoral, even though it should be legal. They have a right to do it. They don't want morality. They reject morality. They don't want to be told that they can't sleep with children. Some of them, anyway, right? Because they feel like sleeping with children. Why should they be stopped? And the children doesn't object, they claim. I mean, it's sick. Sick. And if you listen to my debate on anarchy with this Polish guy, it's on my YouTube channel. Just put Yaron Brook Anarchy debate, you'll find it. And I get him there. We're basically saying what he's objecting to is an objective morality. That's what he doesn't want. That's what he won't accept. That's what they reject. And that's part of why they reject intellectual property. Right? So, not all libertarians, let's be clear. There are many libertarians who just love free markets, and they understand free markets, and they might even be soft anarchists, what I call soft anarchists. They can't see a logical argument not to be an anarchist, but they don't really believe in anarchy. They don't really have that view. But I think many libertarians are basically just want freedom and want free markets, and they're good people. There is a fringe within the libertarian movement that is anarchist, that are anti-life, that are destructive, and they're the ones who don't reject explicitly any kind of objective morality. So you can't brush all libertarians with one brush, although they need to do a better job differentiating themselves. Over there, those are the crazy libertarians. We're the sane libertarians, you know. And to some extent, they've done that. So the crazy libertarians are mainly associated with the von Mises Institute and some other organizations, and the saner libertarians are associated with Cato. But even there, there's significant flaws. Foreign policy, for example, and other issues. Okay, but I don't want to do a show right now on libertarians. Okay, I think we're done, right? An hour, 10 minutes. That's good. We're out of Super Chat questions. Next show, either tomorrow or Friday. Well, let me just pull up my calendar and let you know, because there's a show I'm looking forward to. I'm doing, I think, on Saturday. Come on, calendar, open up. There it is, my calendar. On Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, I'm interviewing James Tooley. Now, I don't know if you know who James Tooley is, but if you don't know, you should know who James Tooley is. James Tooley is one of the leading thinkers on privatizing education. He has done some of the most interesting research on private schools that I have seen. Private schools in poor countries like Nigeria and India. Fascinating guy. I've seen him speak. You know, he's not an objectivist, but he is really interesting on privatization of education. So he's British, so we're doing this 1 p.m. Eastern Time, so it's evening in the UK. So we'll be talking about privatizing education, maybe some other things. He also teaches at an interesting university in the UK. So stay tuned. Saturday, May 9th. James Tooley, he wrote a book called The Beautiful Tree. It's an amazing book. So if you haven't read the book, then I encourage you to get it. We'll talk about the book on the show. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. That should be fun. And I've decided I'm gonna do a few shows now on privatizing education. So I've got a few other people, at least one other person lined up to talk about homeschooling. And so that'll probably be early next week. So we'll start with Saturday with James Tooley, and then we'll go on to some other people talking about education reform and homeschooling, privatizing education, and so on. So just to get a little bit away from coronavirus and lockdowns and all of that stuff. All right, everybody, have a great day. Evening, I guess. And I will probably talk to you tomorrow, Friday, but certainly on Saturday with James Tooley. So talk to you then. Bye, everybody.